I think I will jump straight to the left-right brain distinction though, because we're already mentioning that a little bit. I'm about halfway through Ian McGilchrist's book. I have the title jotted down. It's what I started a little while ago, The Master and His Emissary. And then I put it down and I'm about to pick it back up again. So, this is also an opportunity for me to learn what other smart people think about this topic that I'm invested in, that I asked you to read about. And I'm just curious, there's so many cliches about the left-right brain distinction, and McGilchrist does a lot of throat clearing necessarily to talk about this because he's trying to get past a lot of misconceptions. We have a lot of simplifications about how the brain works. Nevertheless, as best I understand his ideas about halfway through the book, it does kind of roughly map on to some of our stereotypes about the right hemisphere being more intuitive, it being inarticulate almost definitionally, that our ability to describe the world is a very left brain function. And that makes it hard for the right hemisphere to assert itself. And he feels like a lot of our societal conflicts come about from this tension we have between which you could think of as like the Enlightenment versus the romantic halves of our brain. But I'm really curious if anyone has thoughts about this, if anyone is really well read on this, and what you guys think. Obviously, this also relates to our ability to create thinking machines and trying to model our own brains into these new beings, and if we can summon them into existence.
I'll hop in because I read The Matter with Things with a interintellect group, and with a bunch of people who are much smarter than me, so I was able to like pick up a lot of information and like McGilchrist's like view of the world. But like his like at the core, the left right brain distinction is like between like parts and the whole. So the left brain, if it were to see a face, sees like, oh, it notices like here are the eyes and here's the nose and here's the mouth. But right brain is like, oh, this is Megan, right? I take in the whole image of your face and your whole profile and consume that all into like, like and associate it with something. And art, he talks about music a lot of like, yes, you can, break down the harmonics and the math of music, but doing that like is not fun or enjoyable or beautiful in the same way as just listening to the music, of just consuming the whole thing. And I think painting is similar as well, right? That if you were to just like break down the individual pigments in a painting, or all the pixels in an image, that like you can mathematically define what it is, but just looking at it and absorbing it is how you like appreciate the beauty of it.
And does anyone think that there's anything analogous going on with our chatbots, that there's some kind of right brain capacity at all that we can build into those? Anyone who understands how this technology works better than I do?
I certainly think that we have a predisposition to use our own right brains when dealing with them and looking at them and kind of assuming more of a being within them than maybe there actually is.
Does anyone on the call actually have experience on the engineering side of AI? I'm a software guy, but I've never done AI from the point of view of an engineer.
I know at like a basic level that like neural nets are like modeled after neurons in the brain, right? So you have a single input and it has like weights to different inputs, and every time you feed in it, when it goes to a certain node, there's like a statistical probability that it'll go to a different node. So instead of like normal ones and zeros, like bits, computer engineering where there's exactly defined input and output, there's more of a like a fuzziness to each input and each output.
I did a AI course for non-technical people, and one of the most interesting things for me about it was that the concept of parameters in models is basically how many things are connected to other things in that model, which is a precursor for the closest thing within AI that feels like creativity. So I think when you meet somebody and you're like, oh, you're so well read, or you can look at this thing from different contexts because you've lived in different places, or you're multidisciplinary in the Santa Fe Institute kind of approach, that basically is the equivalent of calling a model as saying that you have a lot of parameters. And so I've been thinking a lot about the concept of parameters in AI versus, hey, you're really good at connecting the dots and literally, and you really like borrow concepts from, I don't know, ecology to engineering to like the arts, and you're able to make these connections and these metaphors and analogies. And that has kind of been depressing, but definitely definitive in that maybe the whole connecting the dots thing is not really at the frontier we're going to differentiate ourselves from AI, because it's literally like recalling how to connect things.
When you say depressing, like it makes you less impressed now with people who are capable of that?
I mean, like, I'm still impressed by people who can ride horses, even though cars are superior to horses. Like, that's still impressive, but in a like useless, like, idle like way. Like, oh, it's really great that you know how to fence, although a gun can take you down. But I thought that was going to be the defining thing, like the je ne sais quoi. I don't know how it made me think of this, and I'm like, oh, it's just parameters in my brain. It's really interesting how learning about AI, and if you have limited like knowledge of biology, it's like weird. It's like learning about yourself via the reference of yourself and then going back. It's, I don't know, it's weird. It's like reverse engineering the carbon copy of the negative of the photo, and trying to reconstruct in your brain what that person looks like without having ever seen the photo. Anyways, I don't know what I'm saying, but
Well, that makes sense. This is one of the things that's interesting as a layperson about AI for me, is the hope that it's going to teach us about ourselves. We don't really understand how our own minds work. And if we can figure out how to create a mind, it's a different type of mind. Maybe it won't be how our brains work, but even in contrasting it, maybe that can teach us something.
yeah, my operating theory right now, just to be clear, is that everything is like horse riding.
Horse riding?
Yes.
Like everything that we do.
Yeah, like everything that we do will eventually become horse riding, just leisure. I don't know. I don't believe, based on as a person in the world, that there's anything out there that is unique to humans anymore outside of like spiritual faith-like stuff. I don't know if there's anything that we can do that cannot be, like, it's all patterns.
Yeah, but I mean, I can't speak to the image and movie generation AIs, but kind of the nature of existence is that you can't put it in words, right? I mean, I think that's kind of what art is for, is uh, the experiential, essence that changes second by second if you kind of sit with your thoughts and watch them for a while. So, um, LLMs are really good for words, especially words that have been written before. I mean, I don't use them to write like full thing. I will use that if it's for a business thing. I'll say, generate an outline for this. It's good for that. I'll also use it kind of like as a high, better than a thesaurus. Like I'll have a concept I want to get across, and I'll say, come up with a good metaphor for this. And it's really good at like spitting out a half dozen metaphors that would work. But I don't.
Do you ever choose one? Does that work out?
Yeah. I mean, I've taken like an essay that I don't know how to end, and say, what would be a good way to wrap this up? And it comes back with a couple of ideas that I can modify. But fundamentally, like, I think this gets back to what you're saying about music. I feel like music was the first art form. I can't remember, I read years ago an essay where someone speculated that music, if you imagine going into battle, and there's a bunch of sort of ape-like creatures, and one group is just sort of ambling along and the other group is like hitting sticks in unison, that would be like really intimidating, you know, to see that coming at you. And, you know, someone else sort of mentioned that music basically breaks down into two types. There's martial music and there's romantic music, you know, music for fighting and music for making love. And it just makes all the sense in the world to me that it's like, I mean, I guess there was representational art, you know, like the cave painting stuff, but I don't know how much of that was aesthetic versus just, at least initially, just kind of like, you know, here's where the watering hole is, you know, go this way. But music, the thing also, I mean, being a music guy, of course, I'm more into the music, but one of the unique things about music that I guess paintings can do this, but it doesn't feel as resonant to me, is someone can take a song and then redo, you know, can do the same chords, the same words, but just totally different kind of feeling to it, you know, a totally different vibe. And
Yeah, I think you do get that with painting. And the essay used an example that you can have two painters with equal amounts of accuracy paint the same scene. And we would all recognize the difference between, say, like Monet and Van Gogh painting the same scene. And it has nothing to do with the accuracy, it has to do with their approach. And I think that would be analogous what you're saying.
I guess, but it's not quite what I'm getting at, because it's not about the scene. It's about it. What would be more interesting is someone taking a Monet and then doing their own version of the Monet, right? And the same with the music. So, like, I don't know, for years I used to listen to, you know, like that song "Hey Ya" by Outkast. You know, there's this guy who did like a folk version of it that's just beautiful and completely different. But part of what makes it so beautiful is, you know, the original, right? It's a reference back to the original art. If it had just been released on its own and I'd never heard the original, I probably wouldn't like it as much, you know.
I see. Yeah, we do get that also in visual arts. Normally they're always titled after so-and-so's original. And there's various ways painters will riff off of that. And yeah, knowing that art historical background is usually what gets people excited about those kinds of paintings. And then there's a trend in the art world where this becomes very recursive and people are referencing other people's references, and it kind of becomes a little insider conversation too. A little different than popular music because very different audience there.
And just smaller. I mean, you know, I mean, music is ubiquitous. Everywhere you go, you hear it, you know. So it's, I remember thinking that years ago when I was in China and I heard a song that was actually an American song, but with Chinese words. You know, it was a Chinese interpretation of it. And I was walking through a shopping mall, you know.
We're kind of hinting at a question I've started to ask people. And I love asking this of people who are more in the AI industry, because they should be able to make a good prediction for me. But whether or not you are, just maybe give me your gut answer. How long, if ever, do you think it'll be before AI can make original new art, where it's not just this kind of riffing or imitative act, where you can look at it and say, that's a genuinely new aesthetic? So for example, you can pick any famous art aesthetic movement or singular artist. And, you know, before Van Gogh existed, we couldn't have pictured his paintings, but now no one could imagine a world without his impasto brushstrokes. So when do you think AI is going to be capable of creating something that's a genuine original contribution? It's going to saturate our, like, aesthetic understanding of the world.
I'm in the camp that thinks it won't be the LLM architecture. There's talk and debate about whether there's a wall, whether ChatGPT 5 hit a wall, whether the scaling up increases the ability. But fundamentally, they work on statistical likelihood. So, and they couldn't work at all without statistics, without probability. So to take that hard left turn that brings about a new aesthetic is not really in the way they work. They don't, like humans, they don't get tired of the thing they see the most. They lean towards the thing they see the most.
I think you could do it today. I don't think I agree with you, Sam, in the sense that it wouldn't simply be an LLM, and I think that there would be some human guidance there. But I think it would be possible to prompt an LLM to come up with a prompt that described something that didn't fit into any existing artistic movement that was utterly different from anything that had come before, and then send that prompt to a diffusion model to generate art based on it, which would then be a new paradigm, whether it was of merit or not. But it would be something completely different than anyone had ever seen.
You can try that now. My suspicion would be that it would take words like avant-garde, you might get some futurism, or you get stuff from, it could be a century ago. In music, noise, discord that always presents itself as quote experimental, although it hasn't been experimental in a very long time. So my sense is today it would do that. It would take the artwork that's already described with those terms and spit out something that, has some jagged lines, for instance, or some colors that don't match.
So this is not exactly answer the question, but it sort of gets at like what I think is more likely. I don't know if I don't know the name of that studio. Is it Ghibli or Ghibli? Where when suddenly everyone was making images of that, right? Someone took, so they took the photo of Jackie O when JFK was shot, climbing onto the back of the car, and they ran that through there. So it was almost like this weird sort of like if The Simpsons reenacted the Zapruder film. And I couldn't help but like bust out laughing, but I felt bad because that was like a real person. That was something that really happened. She watched her husband get killed right in front of her, but it was such that's a left turn. Let's take this incredibly iconic, tragic event and like turn it into a cartoon, and then make you feel guilty for laughing at the cartoon.
Wait,
I feel as though that's sorry.
This, or did a person say, "Give me a cartoon of that"?
The latter. I was gonna.
Someone did. It was prompted. I'm doubtful that AI will just all on its own do anything without a prompt, right? So I think the more likely, it's less like, well, I can imagine two scenarios. So one is just like in the early days of YouTube, I thought YouTube was dumb. Like all it was just, copyright infringements of The Daily Show and stuff like that. And then people started creating original videos. And I came across this one guy who'd taken a bunch of videos of different musicians, one guy playing a piano, another guy playing the drums, and he mashed that all together into a song. And then he made a video of it that it would go between. It was amazing. And I just have this image somewhere. There's like some 15-year-old kid who's got, rich parents who have unlimited access to some video creation tool. And right now they're spending 8 hours a day creating an entire movie, with a real screenplay and, everything, but it's all being generated. And, it's not going to be anything now. It may not be anything 3 years from now, but 8 years from now, it comes out and it's just this blockbuster thing. It's like, oh my God, there's this new artist on the block. And their medium is the AI generation tool.
I have been thinking that art forms like film that normally require this Herculean effort of a lot of people working together could become the work of a single artist, the way painting always has been. And cinema, of course, borrows a lot from theater, but also painting as well. And it's like I think of it as a kind of child art form of painting and drawing in a lot of ways, or like painting and drawing is one of the parents, maybe theater is the other. So I think like if I were a filmmaker, I would be really excited about those possibilities. Of course, I'm the type of personality who became a painter. It's a more solitary art form. So maybe there's people who really like that collaborative nature of film who'd feel a big loss as well. So in terms of humans being able to use AI as a super sophisticated tool and to create their own film, I think is a little different than what to me is this really romantic idea of actually having a genuine android person that I could paint alongside, that I could know in the way that when I love watching Star Trek for characters like the Doctor on Star Trek Voyager, who's this artificial intelligence doctor, and through the circumstances that this ship finds themselves in, they have to give this doctor more and more autonomy, and it becomes a real person, and he's quite charming. And I want those kinds of people, like people, not just machines in my life. And I think it would be really lovely. So I'm really excited about that possibility. I asked Tyler Cowen what he thinks about this timeline, because I respect his opinion on AI. And he thinks in about 5 years, the machines could actually start creating their own arts. And he thinks, or he said a lot of good arts. And he thinks someone will have to turn up the temperature on one of these models. And it would have to be creating millions, billions of images that other AIs would then paw through all those drafts and find a few good ones. And he thinks with brute force plus randomness plus critical reviewing with these other AIs, that'll triumph and we'll actually get some AI art. So putting that out there, if anyone has any responses to it, because like I said, this is something I don't feel super knowledgeable on how the technology works. I have this layperson understanding of it. But that's what one insider thinks.
Makes me like really mad, actually. Very strong negative emotional reaction to that.
I'm right there with you, Taylor.
For me, that just sounds like the complete opposite of kind of like what creativity means to me at all. In the sense that I'm definitely of the camp that says that like creativity is not about pure originality, but is rather about remixing. And even when you have an artist that, you know, creates a new style, it's because they wanted to try and figure out how to like represent dappled light, or, you know, they saw something and something else and they thought, okay, well, what if I tried to like mix these two things together? But it's very much not and then I did a billion different things and then filtered it through and had, you know, other people's minds look at it to tell me which one was good. Like that's like an artist that decides what to make because other people told them what was good. Like that's not creativity.
That's what I cringed at too, Megan, when you said that quote from Tyler. So I'm wondering, was there a further discussion about how we're describing good?
I didn't press him on that. Partly because I think this is all really vague and kind of hard to maybe evaluate until we finally see it in front of us. And then we can get into some really fun arguments about taste. So, but when I asked him the question, I did explicitly ask about originality, this idea of not just being able to create very good pastiche, which I think that is already possible, especially if you're working with the image generator to fix all the little errors and get it there. And John, maybe you know more about that because you spent so much time with AI image generation, and I doubt I have as much as you. But the idea of actually being able to invent something new, it's a kind of a catch-22 to even, or I find it mind-boggling personally to think about, because like I can't imagine a world that doesn't have all of these different famous painter styles already in it, or a world without Art Deco. But there of course was a time when Art Deco or jazz just didn't exist. And I agree with you, Taylor, that there's this remixing and synthesis that happens. You know, jazz was very influenced by things like gospel music that came before it. Art Deco is this famously voracious aesthetic that takes in the entire world's worth of art history and remixes that into something that ended up being very new. And so it's impossible for me to imagine a world without it. And then it's really mind-boggling to imagine being in a world right before it existed, and how exciting it is for something like that to emerge into the world. So when I asked Tyler, that's what I was talking about just something new, which is a little bit different than greatness, or they're just different categories. So a lot different, but maybe a lot of overlap too. So that's what I was asking him about, is if this is going to be an ability to be original, which is a relatively new value in the history of human thoughts. And we could also talk about if that's necessary for it to be good.
I want to add a dimension to this conversation. Even if we think that original work exists and not everything is a remix, there is the element of the audience, right? Like original ultimately is an adjective. But if AI is having this kind of factory-like style of production, and you're just like producing a lot of things, and they're going through 3 or 4 culls until something gets produced, which I imagine is how Amazon Basics works. Like they're just like continuously producing a lot of prototypes until they're like, all right, this like thing works. A lot of people order it. Let's keep that. Let's kill that. Or like Google products. Does greatness exist if the production process is so fast that the audience, and we're assuming here audience is still humans, not machines, cannot keep up with absorbing and experiencing it? Because everything that we're talking about historically, all our references are humans producing work that other humans are like, this is great or this is not great. But if the pace becomes so fast because AIs are like instantaneously producing art and iterating super, super quickly, I don't know if the audience can, I don't know if we can keep up and like carry the context enough to be like, oh, I don't really like the 70s music because like it's like a reaction to the 60s, and the 60s were real. And like actually, like there was a moment for humans to keep up and for the audience to keep up with what was happening and what the artists were trying to do and what was the political moment. Like everybody had the same speed of time. But I think if it's AI art and like human audience, something seems off.
I would agree, Michelle. I think that there is something in turn, you're talking about quantity and overwhelm. And I think I would add to that context and emotion and relevance to our lives. Is AI going to contribute in those realms? I mean, so something that's original and we can say like, oh yeah, I've never seen anything like that before. But why do I care? What does that mean to me or to this moment? Or can I see something from the person who created it? So both as an audience member and as a creator, I think what's lacking or what I'm interested in is how much emotion and context plays into how we value and how we take in and create some of this. So that's why back to the quote, Megan, about good, I was thinking like, okay, so maybe it's visually interesting. I've never seen that before, but does it hit me on any other level? Does it mean anything? Can I intuit anything as an audience member?
If I could just quickly say, I'm not necessarily sure greatness won't be created. I'm just curious if we'll have enough context to notice it. Because like it's so advanced. Like if you brought somebody from the year like 1500 to here, like I don't know if they'll immediately be like, this is better than then. I don't know. Like it might not be obvious to them right away because they don't have the context of the last 500 years.
They'd
So
say, you all look like you're dressed.
AI becomes so fast, maybe we can't see something that is objectively awesome if we had, I don't know, Neuralink in our heads and we're like, oh, I can keep up.
And do I even want to try? That's my question. Do I even want to try?
Are we all default hipsters at that point? And we're
yeah. Is there a contraction in terms of what we choose to take in or how much we care if it's not human created?
Right. It sounds like we're at that point, we're old fuddy-duddies, right? We're all like, it's gone beyond us. Like my dad with pop music after 1970, you know,
we're all going to be Luddites again or something. Yeah.
we're just, it's not that it's bad. It's just, we don't get
it. There's that scene, I don't think this is giving anything away, in the movie Her, where Joaquin Phoenix asks, well, he gets very close to this machine, and then he asks, wait, you're not talking to other people? Or she says, yes, I'm talking to 1,100,032 people. Yeah, at which point the relationship between him and her doesn't mean anything anymore.
I also thought of that movie during this little snippet of the conversation, but I was thinking of the part where she goes off and has like a book club with the other AIs, and they're like having their own little like AI culture because they're just so advanced compared to the humans that they kind of create their ideas go far beyond where the humans can kind of keep up with.
I think about that film a lot.
That's an interesting version of where this could go as well, which is the humans do the horse riding equivalent of engaging in human generated art, and the AIs go and, just churn up, create their own whole thing, and we look at it and it's sort of like, you've heard those stories of like AIs that create their own languages to communicate with each other more efficiently or whatever. It could, like, you could have that happen for art, where like they're sort of getting some kind of aesthetic signal from something that we look at and think like, oh, I don't see anything in it, right?
Is the language, the LLM to LLM or AI to AI language, an evolution, something that's beyond our reach and that is just more complicated than anything we could understand? Or is it a devolution, a simplification to only like communicate that which is necessary?
It's a little bit like when you catch ice that's so cold, it kind of like, it feels like it's a burn. Like something too fast and something too slow. Like at some point you're just like, I don't know what it is, but I know it's not my speed.
You're just like, ouch.
I'm also thinking about the fact that like there is going to be a splitting where like we're not going to necessarily have a shared reality. And like obviously this is happening in politics and the world and everything, but also like you don't like, it's like the scene from Cypher in The Matrix where he's like, I just want to be famous and I know the stake is not real. And so it's like the assumption is that there's going to be one gallery, it's going to be one Sotheby's and Christie's, there'll be one auction, there will be like one shared consensus of what is good art. And that is the world we live in today, because like everything's priced and like there is a shared thing, and Frieze New York and Frieze London are essentially like sister conference, events. And but there might be a world where more and more you're kind of surrounded primarily by bots that are reacting to your own creativity. And that's kind of like your own intellectual creative nursery. And it might be a world, like I heard this really great reference the other day, that introverts are extroverts with a higher bar. Like they really like people. They're just like underwhelmed by most people, while extroverts make people work. And so there's never been a better time to be like a solo founder of like a tech company, or a solo artist, or a solo filmmaker, because like you can be surrounded by all these AI assistants and like create your own reality with just inference costs. And so maybe you can also create your own audience and just be in that little bubble. And there's something about that feels likely to me.
But where does from a creator perspective now, meaning comes from expressing something visually or in writing or whatever, and having a response to it that means something from somebody else because there's a shared experience or whatever. So I'm thinking about myself. So if I'm writing and I produce a story or something and I have my own built audience, do I care? Like, we're losing something, I think, if we're taking the human out of it, both on the creator side and on the audience side. So I'm not challenging the technical capabilities, but the value and the meaning of this.
Yeah, Lori, I would just add to that by saying I think it's it's even more than the shared experience that you're having. It's like the shared humanity. There's like an element of solidarity there. And I think this is the part that's very romantic, right? Like I was just in Europe a couple of months ago. I was thinking about there's all these old beautiful churches there, and I was thinking about how like in the medieval peasants would go into these churches and you would see these like beautiful high arching ceilings and this gold leaf art, and you would think it's kind of like divinely inspired. Like there is an element of separation between them and the art, and that created like a feeling of awestruck and beauty. But I think for me today, knowing that like this art was not actually done by God, but done by someone who is in fact like me, and someone who like had a mind that works the way my mind works is in some ways like even more inspiring than it would have been to the medieval peasant walking in the cathedral.
You weren't
Like, I think
inspired by the
knowing
technical perfection of it. You were inspired by the human
the
achievement
humanity.
and
Yeah,
even
exactly.
some of the imperfections, right? Like, yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, but in some ways, yeah, when you're looking at particular art and you see some of the imperfections or you hear the artist speaking about their own work, yeah, that's the stuff that's more interesting. I agree, Sean. That's a great example.
This brings together a couple of thoughts that like sort of stitch to things we were talking about earlier about, you know, Megan, you said up front, you said when we were talking about the left brain and right brain, you said like the left brain is about like seeing and describing the world, and the right brain is, you know, more about the feeling of it. And for me, so much of art is about that precise observation of like really like communicating what it is that you see. And this reminds me of like one of my favorite things to do in museums, when I look at paintings, is to find things that like where the artist like did the best they could, but like they were trying to do something impossible. So a really good example of this is paintings with lightning in them, from like a time before photography. And very clearly, like, you know, the only experience of lightning that you could have had at that point is like that brief flash in the sky and then it disappears, and then trying to like sort of recreate that from memory. And the lightning comes out looking like just super awkward, or like just like a very like simple zigzag or something like this. And to me, that's just like so much more endearing of kind of the human experience of of memory and trying to, you know, create something from memory, trying to like do your best to observe something with like the sort of limited set of tools. And it also reminds me of cases where I'm trying to remember, there's a great essay that I read once about an artist who was kind of losing his sight, and you can see his kind of like, you know, his art changes like over the course of this like degenerative disease. And like that's so interesting as well, as the sort of like imperfection and the story of his experience that comes through the art. And like, I couldn't do that, right? Like, what's it going to be like? Oh, this is how it would be if I was supposedly losing my sight, which I don't have because I'm AI. Like,
And if it could, a huge draw of art is the insights into other people. That includes, you know, the characters, if we're talking about fiction or subject, or the creator themselves.
Yeah, somebody mentioned the cave paintings earlier in their intro, and it was imagining them as a kind of map, like here's the watering hole. And what's really interesting is a lot of our earliest cave art is not informative. It was maybe more of a spiritual purpose. We can only guess. But my favorite early cave paintings are the Chauvet caves in France, and they are very cinematic because there are cave lions or rhinoceroses, all sorts of animals that appear to be galloping, because kind of like a Muybridge example of how a horse moves with photography, where you have these like 4 or 5 legs showing this motion of the leg moving. So we're getting that not just before photography, but like Paleolithic era, where they somehow like the lightning. You know, when they see these animals, it's not obviously not so brief, but they probably are not drawing these things through observation directly. Maybe they could drag a carcass into the cave and paint by firelight, but they might also be painting from memory by firelight. And I've always found that really remarkable, because these are often very anatomically correct, sophisticated technically as renderings. And it is incredible what they're able to probably remember and bring back. I get that similar feeling that you get, Taylor, looking at the lightning strikes. And John, you mentioned trying to depict a migraine aura. Have you seen someone do that in art? You mentioned that in the chat. I don't think I've seen a painting like that.
Maybe if you look at the Oliver Sacks book, Migraines, I get migraines from time to time with an aura, and no artistic depiction really does it justice. Although it's interesting to see what others have depicted. I'd actually be curious to try to get an LLM to generate such a scene.
You're going to be up all night now.
Probably not, but I am curious about that. So anyway, it's about as hard to depict as lightning, I would say.
Well, it sounds like you don't think it's impossible.
I don't think it's impossible. No.
No.
It could be too that everyone's experience of them is a little different. So the reason why other people's depictions of them don't match mine is because my own experience doesn't match theirs.
Is it the kind of thing that could be depicted in like a static, like still image, or do you like, as someone who hasn't experienced this, is it something that like has kind of like a temporal movement quality to it that you would need a video or something more like three-dimensional to depict?
Not three-dimensional, but you could depict it in a movie, in a video. And of course, diffusion models can generate short video clips as well.
So a question I want to pose to everyone is, do you think that the Enlightenment and Romanticism can or should be reconciled?
I was a little irritated by the dichotomy that they had to be in conflict. So I really, really want to reconcile them. like I right now we're looking at all these works that sort of denigrate the Enlightenment / rationalist approach to living and are proponents of the romantic as an alternative. And I just want to say, wait, why do they have to be in conflict with each other? So yes, I'm very for
they're like a left brain, right brain, metaphor there. So we can have both.
I'll give you guys a little more context to this. They are usually viewed as, you know, Romanticism is this reaction against the Enlightenment, this backlash, but they're not always and inevitably, I think, at odds. So the Romantics, incidentally, were very influenced by Immanuel Kant, who's one of the great fathers of the Enlightenment. And I learned this through Isaiah Berlin. So as he puts it, it was Kant who really secularized and popularized the idea of like the sacred human individual, as taking that from being this kind of sacred Christian context as being more like the inviolable, the secular version of that individual. Kant was really horrified about the idea of determinism, that we could kind of be like a biological machine. And so the Romantics were very influenced by him, and they took his ideas in ways that he would have been horrified by and created this romantic hero, this valorizing the individual to sometimes a very pathological degree, where the individual wants to make the outer world resemble their inner world, and sometimes will have very violent means of doing so, that they want this radical subjectivity, their own subjectivity imposed. So for all that the Romantics, many of them hated the Enlightenment passionately, they're also a brainchild of it. They couldn't have existed without it. Their own value of originality was not always a great value. It was seen as like heresy in the West, at least. And then once the technological scientific revolutions came along, the word innovation, which had always been this really negative word, again, always linked with heresy in the West, was kind of rehabilitated. And it was because of science and technology that all of a sudden there was a reason to use the word innovation in a positive way. So the Romantics, who are insisting on all this originality and innovation, are also getting that value from the fact that the Enlightenment rehabilitated the entire concept of innovation. So for all that historically the Romantics have this backlash, they're also borrowing and just repurposing these ideas. If you read my essay, you know that I think there's no reason we can't then repurpose the Romantics in turn. and take some romantic sensibility and feel that towards the Enlightenment. I'm a big lover of the Enlightenment. So my cards on the table, I believe we should reconcile them. And if indeed people like McGilchrist are correct that there's this kind of right-left hemisphere distinction that this is related to, well, these are two halves of our minds that are equally important, or ought to be. So that's my view, but argue with me. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think the criticism of rationalism or enlightenment is that there's this smallness, this like idea that you just bureaucratize everything, you analyze everything, you're focused on the little and on these sort of this mathematical approach to the world. But then the fault of romanticism seems to be that it says, oh, does this feel right? Does this like provoke a feeling in me that's aligned with does this like align with the things that I value? Is this not even a good feeling necessarily, but a powerful enough feeling or something like that, somehow like aesthetically aligned with me? And you're not paying attention to the morality. You're not paying attention whether the outcome is actually good or not. And in a strange way, I feel like there's this analogy that the authors that we were reading today were drawing between techies and rationalists, right? Because they are mathematical, because they are technological. But I would say they're sort of romantic in a way too, because if you're developing something because it's cool and not because because the outcome is good or bad, and not because you've considered the outcome and figured out whether the outcome is actually going to be good or bad, you're just doing it because of that feeling of coolness, then maybe you're a romantic, not a rationalist.
I want to, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think the two can be reconciled, and I think you can see examples of it, of how they're reconciled well in the period of time before the Enlightenment and the Romantics have this clash. So like the example that comes to mind for me is Bach. Like Bach is, if you look at his music, he has like a grasp of music theory that's profound, and he's obviously like, in order to have, you know, contrapuntal motion with like several voices leading each other, there's like a depth of kind of reason and logic, and then also passion, right? Like, so he has the two. He understands passion, he understands reason. I forget who says this, but I have this quote somewhere in my head that I'm gonna half remember and mess it up, but it's something like, if you listen to Bach, you understand what it's like. Sorry, if you listen to Beethoven, you understand what it's like to be Beethoven. But if you listen to Bach, you understand what it's like to be God looking at the universe. And Beethoven famously is like a romantic, right? All passion, just and in order to make music like Beethoven, you have to have reason as well, but he's leading with passion, and it's a very individualistic, like you do experience, you feel like you're experiencing the world from the point of view of Beethoven. I think it was a very memorable quote for that reason. But yeah, I think Bach is like more timeless. He's the greatest musician. He just, everything's in harmony. And so getting back to like reconciling the Enlightenment with the Romantics, like, yeah, I think reason goes too far when it's like you can't see the forest for the trees, and then romance and passion goes too far when you are just looking at the forest and not looking at the trees. You could think about it like left brain, right brain, but you can put them in harmony, and if you're doing it well, you're doing what Bach is doing.
I think also just, you know, sort of touching on what John said, I'm a software guy. I also have to do a fair amount of accounting for some other projects. And when I'm balancing the books, most people think that's like going to the dentist, but that is like deeply satisfying to me when the numbers all add up and tie together. And, I would never put, a balanced checkbook on display in a gallery, but I think the experience of doing it is probably similar to what an artist feels when they're painting and just kind of totally in the moment. And so even, the most technocratic thing imaginable, I think still has a sort of a deeply human element.
I wish I felt that way when I was doing my taxes. Felt the same way I do at my easel.
That's my concern about AI in general, and it expands from whether we're talking about creativity or book balancing. Humans need some kind of job in whatever sphere to feel like we're contributing, to feel like we're special. It takes effort to feel satisfied. That's what I worry about potentially losing.
Megan, one thing I wanted to say about Enlightenment versus Romanticism is I feel like it's a debate about what to take from the past into the future between two movements. So on one hand, you can think of Enlightenment saying we need to remix the antiquities as like the core building blocks of the future, and Romanticism saying no, and what we need to do is to become re-enchanted by what is, the recently ending medieval times. So I'm struck by the fact that there are two debates about what to take from the past into the future. So in many ways, neither is like the more progressive. They're both two conservative takes, and they're just debating which one to take into the future.
What do you think a third way is there?
I don't know. Maybe ask the Asians.
Did you say the Asians?
The Asians, yeah, something completely outside, or this idea of like the antiquities, the Middle Ages, and modernity strikes me as primarily Western construction and a Western experience. And I wonder if there's like some kind of completely orthogonal like read of how to diffuse that debate by bringing in somebody that does not have a lot of context on the legitimacy of this dichotomy.
Yeah, well, then you also get into things like I hear people all the time complaining about like Western medicine, and so then looking at like Eastern medicine when they're using the same medicine, if they're using real medicine at all. They're really bad names. It doesn't belong to the West. It's what works. So the Enlightenment, science, and all the technology and the medicines we invent with it has this claim to universality that no matter who you are, you can replicate this experiment, even though it's coming out of Scotland from hundreds of years ago. Whereas the Romantics are maybe a bit more anchored to the Western tradition in that it was starting off in Germany, this very specific movement. It's branched out, or we could look at it as a piece of human nature more broadly. But that's maybe more of, because they're not even trying to make a claim towards universal. They don't want anything to do with that. They think that that's ridiculous. So they're kind of happy just saying like, no, we're our unique subjective experience over here.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something interesting about Romantics being inherently like very concerned about holding on to themselves, while the Enlightenment movement's representatives being very colonial and like wanting to dominate the world. I mean, one way to read modern history is that for the last 500 years, the West has been the net exporter of goods, services, and ideas. So I'm somebody from I'm an Arab, I'm from the Middle East. Everybody here is like sufficiently satisfied with the fact that I can speak English well. I'm not disappointed that any of you don't speak Arabic, right? And this is like a concept of hierarchy, right? And so I think you cannot speak about the world today without recognizing that it is designed and executed by the West. And maybe in the year 1100, if I was a French lord, I would want my kids to study in Andalusia because that was the Harvard of the time, and keeping them in Germany might not have been the best move if I wanted them to become successful. But like we live in a world that the Enlightenment created, and that is a Western word definitionally.
Yeah, I mean, I'm reading right now A Distant Mirror by Barbara Tuchman, which is, it's basically about the aftermath of the Black Death. It's just shocking how awful people were then, just how corrupt everything was, and how violence pretty much decided everything, and just how like misguided people were about just pretty much everything you can imagine, you know. And so like, you know, sometimes you hear people talk about, we need to cultivate the sacred. We need to, you know, do these things for, you know, young people to, I think what we should do is have people go live alone, without any running water or showers, and have to get their own food, you know, without knowing if it's actually clean, with no health inspection and no medicine for a couple months.
What would happen if they did that?
I think they would realize, I mean, because I've actually done that. I did a survival course a few years ago, and it made me realize, my God, thank God I can take a shower every night, you know. And I think that every time I take a shower, I think I am so lucky to live in a time when I can do this. I mean, you know, a joke I've seen, you know, about the founding fathers is, you know, remember when they were writing the Constitution, they had to wipe their ass with corn cobs. You know, it was just a very different experience. And it's like the hedonic treadmill thing. Like, people just sort of assume everything is already there, but no, most of your day-to-day life is made up of things that often were invented just in the last 50 years, and more conservatively speaking, the last several hundred years, except for the house. I get the idea of a house has been around for a long time, but even then it was just like, you know, until a few hundred years ago, it was just one room and the whole family slept in there, and you know, there was fleas and bed bugs and lice and everything else you can imagine.
So you're not a fan of the Romantics?
I mean, I think romance is the romantic. I mean, I love Beethoven's my favorite composer. So in an artistic sense, yes, but in a political sense, absolutely not. I mean,
but I guess, can you have one without having the other? Like, can we have high art without having some kind of suffering? And that would imply, like, running water immediately reduces the quality of the music, right? Is like sort of this. This is very ridiculous, I know, but like, is there something there?
Maybe. I mean, I don't know. I feel like if Beethoven were alive today, he wouldn't be writing classical music. He would be doing, you know, installations at the Sphere in Las Vegas, you know. So, you know, it's just much more ambitious than, I mean, classical music is right now, it's just kind of a museum, you know.
There's a really interesting argument in football and soccer, for the rest of you, where is Maradona better than Pele? And one of the biggest arguments that people are pro Maradona is, they say Pele played in a time where there was no offside. And if you guys know what offside is, it's like when you can skip through and you can't get a pass. And I feel like if we live in a world, like, so much of what we revere about the past implies in it the scarcity of like what was awesome about the past, like all the beautiful things. So like Notre Dame is beautiful, but like, if it was possible to build a lot of Notre Dames, would we think the Notre Dame is beautiful? And I think there's something about scarcity and the audience experiencing the scarcity that is part of that. Like, I was a kid. This is very quick. I was a kid, and Star Wars, one of the first things I saw, and we were kids, me and my sister, and we like got very confused that the first two movies are like kind of terrible and like the bad guys win. And my dad was an immigration officer. He used to come home in like, you know, kind of military garb. And then we saw part 3, and my mom told me that daddy called the company and changed the ending of the movie. And for like, until I was like 10, I actually thought there was only one Star Wars movie. And like, what I saw was the edited, updated version. And like, that's so resonant to me. And I still watch some of the Star Wars crappy stuff that Kathleen Kennedy creates, because like I had that resonant, scarce experience when I was a kid. But so much of that is like like I had less parameters when I was a kid. You know what I mean? Like, I was not able to store a lot of data because there was not a lot of data to store. And I wonder how much of this conversation is about like supply.
Well,
this reminds me what of another Scott Alexander essay, where he's talking about, the thing I remember from it is that at the end of the essay, he says, a sunset is as beautiful after having seen 1,000 sunsets as it was on the first time you saw it. And if you don't agree with that, then that's a skill issue. And so, and it kind of goes to DJ's point too about the hedonic treadmill and not having gratitude for hot showers. Like hot showers are like objectively amazing. And
but DJ is saying that you should make the thing scarce for a while, go to a place where there isn't hot water so you can come back and enjoy the hot water.
yeah, so that goes to
get off the hedonic treadmill for a while to appreciate the thing.
No, yeah, it goes to building the skill, right? Like do it, what DJ is giving us like a blueprint for how to gain this skill. And maybe there's other ways to gain the skill too, but it is a skill issue.
I mean, just think about something like the movie Office Space, which I think is just like one of the most brilliant movies ever, right? I feel like that movie is basically a perfect caricature of what it's like to wait on hold with the bank, right? You know, just that annoying music. But if you could take that movie and go back up 200 years and show it to people, and they're like, wait a minute, you don't have to like go out and plow the field yourself. You get to sit at a desk all day. I mean, that's heaven, you know? So it's just like the context around that, I think is very important.
I think there's a personality thing here too, where I've noticed on like just taking flights recently that most people don't open their windows on flights anymore. At least I feel like I remember when I was a kid, people really open their windows. Or maybe I'm just projecting, but there's some particularly beautiful cloudscapes on some recent flights I was on that most people were totally uninterested in. And then I was talking to a friend complaining about this, and he's like, yeah, you know, I was flying over Finland or somewhere like that, and there was a big aurora borealis, and the pilot came on and asked us all to open our windows to see, and half the flight didn't bother. And I don't think I personally comprehend that hedonistic treadmill experience well enough to know, like all my life, I grew up flying internationally since I was 10 years old. It's never gotten old. I've never gotten tired of looking out those windows, and I don't need an aurora to make me want to do it. So it's the kind of thing that makes me feel a little misanthropic.
I am like a window seat like connoisseur. So I completely on board with you on that one. Actually, once I was on a flight recently, this is a side story, not the point I want to make, but I was on a flight, I had a window seat, and I was like, had the window open, and I was looking out at it, and a woman across the aisle looked at me and she was like, can you close that? I'm trying to sleep. I was like, what? Like, it's the middle of the afternoon. Like, no, I don't want to look out of my window. Anyway, but what I was gonna say is that I think, Michelle, earlier you used a turn of phrase that really struck me. You said something about how Romanticism was about becoming like re-enchanted with kind of like a recent past. And I wonder if the way to integrate a sort of Romanticism and Enlightenment position is to like find ways of becoming enchanted with the present and future. And like that it's about that sense of enchantment. And that, you know, this ties into like being enchanted by looking out of the windows, right? Being in some ways like charmed by the potential of new technologies, you know, like recognizing like the pleasure of a hot shower, like actually noticing those things, and especially as like some of these things threaten to become more scarce, right? Particularly, you know, like I think noticing and appreciating the benefits of like interacting with other people when like more and more, you know, you're at the bank and you're on a customer service call, and then like finally you've waited in line for half an hour and it's a robot on the other end, and you're like, come on, right? Like, why did I even have to wait all this time? And then, sometimes you actually like get to interact with the person. I actually have two examples from this week that like really I feel so positively about. One, I went to the DMV, and like the woman I was working who was like helping me at the DMV was really kind and really helpful, and we had just a wonderful positive interaction. And I had messed up something on my form, and she was like really patient with me and correcting it, and I was like, wow, like I'm so glad that I got to interact with this human today. And I'm in the process of moving and had to cancel my Spectrum account, and again, when I spoke to the customer service agent, we had like a wonderful interaction. And I feel like maybe the scarcity of being able to like speak to humans in that way makes that feel more precious when you get it. But yeah, there's something about kind of becoming enchanted by what feels like it may be or become scarce in the present and future.
Yeah, and I love the idea of being enchanted by the technology. I feel that way.
I have a very quick reaction, Taylor. The two things that I'm very personally interested in are also extremely romantic and enlightened, and I call them truth and beauty. Those are the things that speak to me. Like everything else, I'm like negotiable, I can take it or leave it. But I'm very interested in truth and beauty, and I try to seek truth and beauty. And sometimes they can happen at once, but sometimes they're usually like separate. They're like blue and red, and sometimes I get some purple on a good day. But it's rarely like united. And I think there's two types of people in this world. There are people who believe that it is not foolish and it is possible to seek those things. And there are people who are very offended that your presentation of truth and beauty is not theirs. And it seems to me that the Enlightenment and the Romantic like kind of battle was fundamentally about your beauty is not my beauty and your truth is not my truth. And it feels like just, I don't know, like two NFL teams like fighting. Like it was really, really like if you think about it, it's like kind of underwhelming. It's like, why does it have to be zero sum? Like there's obviously like, there is a huge debate now in history that like the medieval era was actually not that dark. There was a lot of innovation. It wasn't like, the fall of the Roman Empire and then it's like nothing until like the unification of Castile and Aragon, right? Like there was good stuff happening in between. And the Enlightenment was like, we are finally waking up. And obviously, if you're romantic, you're just like, that's deeply offensive, and we're not just regressive people. So I feel like this idea of being forward-looking and being in the present and seeking truth and beauty in the moment and in the future is a lot more valuable than making anything from the past seem greater than it was and trying to bring it and force it into the present. It's just very limiting.
I think I agree with both of those. That survival course I mentioned, the very last night, we had to walk separate. It was in the dark. This is in the high desert of Utah, about 7,000, 8,000 feet up. And it was a moonless night, and the sky, no clouds. The sky was just like shocking. The stars were just like, I mean, the most I've ever seen in my life, with the naked eye. And we had to walk just alone. We didn't know how far. They just said, keep walking until you come to the campfire. So it ended up being about 10 miles. And so, it's a couple hours of walking, and we're tired. It's the very end of the week, so you're just kind of exhausted. And I remember looking up, and, I don't know much about like constellations. There's like 2 or 3 I recognize, but the rest are, but I just remember thinking, my God, think of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, probably people have been looking up at the stars and like making up stories, like there's a bear and there's an archer, and when they rotate, that means certain things, that those are omens, or they tell you about your own fortune and all that. But when you actually encounter the truth of it, that those things are, millions and billions of light years away, and for every one you see, there's a million more you can't see. Like that to me is like way more awesome than any story that we told for thousands of years. And And we've only just discovered that, right? It's in the blink of an eye that since we sort of started understanding those things. And so to me, that's a real unification of those concepts.
This conversation, just one more quick thing, Megan, that to come back to your original question about reconciling these, it's the conversation is making me think about Ernest Becker. He's like a religious philosopher, and he talks about the human condition being this friction between our human physical selves and sort of all the messiness that comes with having a physical body, right? That we age and we get sick and we get smelly and dirty and all of these things, how we have to deal with that. And if we live too much in that condition, we tend toward depression. But also we have this ability and this desire for something that's bigger than us. And I think that's what you're speaking to, DJ. That's what's making me think about this too, is that to sort of balance out, to pull us out of this depression and this reality of our human bodies, is thinking about and I think this is what you were speaking about earlier, Michelle, was the spiritual, the beauty, we strive to see, to find and appreciate those things in our lives, because that pulls us, out of just this day-to-day challenge of living in a human body, and the human condition is naturally we sort of fluctuate, right, between these two things. Sometimes we're more depressed because we're sick or something's happening. Sometimes we're a little more sort of manic or something because we're caught up in some big idea. And so I think my answer to your question, Megan, is that both are necessary, and that the human condition is between the romantics and the romanticism and enlightenment. We need both. And what makes life interesting, what makes art interesting, what makes just being a human being interesting, is trying to find, noticing the fluctuations and navigating the fluctuations between these ideas as they come up. And sometimes one is more important and relevant, sometimes the other is, but ultimately life is way more interesting if we're trying to balance both.
One of my heroes is the physicist Richard Feynman, and he in an interview talks about a friend of his who was an artist, who would hold up a flower and say, you see, I as an artist can appreciate how beautiful this is, but you as a scientist, you pick it all apart and it becomes this dull thing. And Feynman says, I think he's kind of nutty, because I can see the inner workings, the inner structure. I can imagine the microscopic cells working. As a scientist, I have access to see these things that the artist doesn't see. I can see beauty at a lower level. There's not just beauty at this dimension of 1 centimeter, but beauty at a smaller dimension. And this only adds to the awe, the beauty, and the mystery of a flower. It doesn't subtract, it only adds. And this kind of battle between the arts and sciences, what C.P. Snow, who is both an artist and scientist, called the two cultures, have kind of been at each other's throats. Feynman himself was pretty dismissive of the arts until about his 40s, when he learned how to draw and developed an appreciation for them then. And I think he was having this conversation with his artist friend around that time. So that's my version of romanticism, where I feel that romantic draw towards the ability to, the romantics were so in love with nature, and the romantic painters I talk about in my essay were very much enamored with nature and what is science, but trying to undress nature and get to know her. So I think that there's a lot of commonality there. But romanticism does have a dose of poison. And Michelle, you touched on this, and I did want to ask everyone explicitly to bring in politics a little bit, because populism, which is ascendant globally, can be extremely romantic. And I think one of the things that romanticism does in all of its manifestations is, because it's our passionate side asserting itself in some capacity, that is what can drive a movement. If you don't have at least some dose of romanticism, maybe you're going to be a little too calm and measured to become exuberant enough, to get carried away enough to do anything really momentous. And so when we have a political movement, they want to make momentous things happen. They're going to have that romanticism to them. So this is maybe where we see the most destructive side of romanticism. Outside of politics, people destroy their own personal lives. They ruin the lives of their loved ones, maybe. They die young in tragic circumstances. But on a societal scale, when romance becomes political, we do get a lot of tenuous circumstances coming out of that. And I was curious what everyone thinks. Do you agree with the New Romantics? I'm quoting my essay that we should have a New Romanticism, or do you think it's too dangerous? We're playing with fire here and we're going to regret it.
I'm very wary of romanticism. Like the one thing they get right is beauty, the importance of beauty. But then there's all these like, there's this dark side, there's this poison pill. I actually might wanted to return to some earlier parts of the conversation, but I'll wait to do that. But one of the poison pills, I think, is the obsession with originality that leads to Duchamp. And then yes, if you're hyper focused on beauty and passion, and then maybe you're letting your other faculties go to sleep. You're not thinking rational. Like, yeah, there's you know, Hitler was a romantic figure. He's a very passionate guy. He's very obsessed with like his idea of utopia. And so yeah, there's this dark side. One of my favorite chapters I've ever read about Romanticism comes from the book. It's called Suicide of the West by Jonah Goldberg. There's this chapter on Romanticism in it, and he kind of lays out how Romanticism is part of human nature, and how it will never go away because it's part of human nature, and how it reasserts itself in every generation. You know, the official romantics from the 1800s was a particularly visible version of it, especially because they were, there's this backlash against the Enlightenment. But then in each decade, you can see it emerge in different forms, and it emerges on the right and on the left in different forms, and it has these when like the hippies go too far, it's a very romantic notion of returning to like a utopian natural world, with some seedy underbelly to that. And then on the right, utopianism kind of comes into play a lot, where romanticism goes wrong, and just ignoring, like with passions asserting itself over reason. Sometimes reason is correct. So yeah, I have mixed feelings about romanticism, and I think the New Romantics are naive in some ways. Like, so in your essay, you mentioned Ted Gioia and you mentioned Ross Barkan, and they both are great writers. I've read a lot of their essays, and but I think they, like, when they talk about economics, they have no idea what they're talking about. Ted Gioia is just like economically illiterate, and so is Barkan, I think. And that's the passionate side. Like, economics is very reason, logic focused. So yeah, I think there is going to be a dark side with New Romanticism, but I don't think you can really stop New Romanticism because it is just part of human nature, and it's because we have AI, we're going to have New Romanticism.
Anyone else?
Within music, there was actually a period called neo-romanticism, which was needed because music had turned into just like this very academic, dry kind of bleedle-deedle music. But in terms of politics, I mean, I was too young, but I vaguely remember like the sort of the end of the Vietnam War, Watergate, and sort of politics was like really important, right? People were dying in a war, and the president was corrupt, and the music of that era sort of reflects that. It's all sort of protesty, and then a few years later, we got disco, you know, and people were like, you know what, I'm just kind of sick of all this. Let me just like go to a club and have fun. Um, and so I suspect something similar could happen as well. It's not a one-way. Actually, Steve Martin talks about that. His humor. He said that it, you know, for a while there, you could just go on stage and say Nixon, and that would get a laugh, you know. And so his humor was just like the complete opposite of that. Had nothing to do with current events or politics or anything like that. And that's why he was able to fill stadiums after a while. You know, it was just like so far removed from that. And with this sort of late night stuff with Jimmy Kimmel, I think what's interesting is someone like Conan O'Brien, who, I mean, I haven't watched late night seriously since the 90s, you know. And I remember Conan O'Brien back then, but I didn't really watch him. But, you know, he eventually left, and now he has a podcast, which I love. I listen to it all the time. And his humor is not political at all, except it's just in the silliest kind of way. And I think that's probably what's going to end up being what Jimmy Kimmel does. It's just kind of has a YouTube channel that's 10 times more popular than his ABC show. I'm not sure why I brought that up, but it just sort of is about the way moods can change quickly. And it doesn't necessarily mean we have to go to war to sort of get through this period.
Yeah, in American culture, it seems like we pushed STEM for the last, I don't know, 10, 20 years, right? Like everyone go to college and learn science or technology or software engineering. Um, but do we like, can we teach those people art, and what downstream benefits does that have? Or do we have to teach Ross Barkan economics and teach the artist about you know, science and technology? Um, or both. Like, is it good to have like a cohesive or like a fuller worldview than siloing in on your one specific topic?
But it doesn't sound like we have anyone who's like really rearing for a passionate romantic movement. Is everyone appropriately afraid of the possibilities there?
Politically, yeah, because it can blend in at the extreme with a mob. I mean, some of my most favorite art comes right from, you know, the romantic period, so I would never give up on that. It seems like there's a consensus that the humans as a thinking beast, intellect and raw feeling is just baked into who we are. So I don't see us ever escaping that dichotomy either.
I do think, I mean, to kind of take the other side of that, I do think there is like an element of post-Cold War liberalism that is kind of thirsty for like elements of romanticism, at least. Like, I think a lot of people, I mean, you see it most on the right nowadays, but I think on both sides, a lot of people feel like the forms of liberalism that we've had over the past 30 years or so, since the 90s, kind of lacked a backbone. Like there's no real purpose or vocation that people feel when they're buying into this kind of like system of politics. And romanticism offers that in a way that's kind of precarious, but I think, again, like there's different flavors and varieties of romanticism, so you have to be specific about what you're talking about. But I think I see, you know, especially in like something like British romanticism, which kind of sparked a political movement that led to like the abolition of slavery or like parliamentary reform. I don't see why something like that couldn't kind of like happen in a kind of 21st century iteration of that.
Romanticism for liberalism.
Sorry?
You mean like a romanticism for a classical liberalism instead of the political extremes, instead of the populism?
Yeah. I mean, within the political extremes, you have like there are romantics in like the extreme left and right too. But I think, yeah, I do think there is like a synthesis where you're not allowing one to completely consume the other. Yeah.
I'm thinking a little bit about how if you distill Steve Bannon and you also distill someone like Bernie Sanders, they're both romantic. And if you think about someone like Ezra Klein, which like the left really hates, he's basically trying to create a new sense of enlightenment and being like, let's not just do demand side, let's do supply side work. And everyone's like very offended on the left, being like, how dare you? Like, talk about supply, like degrowth is the way, and we need to be conservative. So I think these two, I think the way the decks are like, the way the US feels to me today is that Romanticism is a far right and far left position by default, and Enlightenment is an embattled centrist position that is exhausted on the defense. It is Byzantium with the Ottomans like at the gates, where it's out of ideas, it's tired, it feels hollowed out. And people like Curtis Yarvin and I don't know, Mamdani and whoever like is Curtis Yarvin's like person on the left that is like equally charismatic seemed full of energy in a way that the Enlightenment people are tired, because the Enlightenment ideas have quote unquote failed. So I don't think it's like an equal, it's not the moment to talk about reconciliation. Because I think if you were a convinced like romantic, you'd be like, well, what will Enlightenment give me? Right?
Well,
Yeah, I think
Gives you a hedge against tyranny. I mean, I think that's
I'm a romantic. I just want to bring back all the old tyrannical ideas, because like it was really interesting that like JD Vance was a huge fan of Lina Khan, right? And I was like, horseshoe all the way.
Yeah, I
Sorry.
think I think you're right. Like you're right to identify Ezra as kind of like an anti-romantic, at least at this period in his career. He had, I think, an earlier romantic period. I think people probably, most people, like especially when they're young, are more romantic by default. Depending, there's different variations on that, but I agree, and I think that the problem of you don't want romanticism in your politics. You want it's funny, I'm thinking of a quote from Vladimir Lenin, of all people, who's very much a romantic, but he says something like heart on ice, head on ice, heart on fire. And it's a memorable quote. Obviously he was horrible.
Does he literally put a heart on ice or
yeah
pretty damn close to it.
Yeah, but I think he's right that about almost nothing, but that you should never have romance in politics. It's it's just like oil and water, they shouldn't mix.
so I'm gonna disagree with you there potentially, where I think that I mentioned a moment ago that the romanticism is what really gives people the chutzpah to do anything and to care more passionately. It's part of that urge. So if we can, and this is what's dicey about it, because how do you direct a romantic passion? But if they happen to be directed a romantic passions towards liberalism, classical liberalism, not conflating that with the left as a synonym, then I think that would be a good use of romanticism in our politics, to not feel so tired and embittered, like Michelle described. I've always found it a little strange that we call in the US, we would call these people centrists. Like, I wouldn't consider myself a centrist, in that I don't think I finding myself partway between the left and the right, I would consider myself an ideologue for classical liberalism and that part of the Enlightenment tradition. That's an ideology that I very positively advocate for. It's not like I'm trying to find a middle ground between some other people's arguments. And if we had more enthusiastic passion for that, so that we're not just tired and embittered and seem like these losers who can barely keep up with the political conversation. If this abundance movement that Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson are trying to popularize right now takes off, it's going to perhaps require a dose of romanticism, however risky, to be successful.
Okay, so
wouldn't you say that calling it abundance and the style, I mean, the styling of the whole thing is quite romantic. I certainly find the word abundance to be quite a sort of like emotionally moving term. As you know, it's not really like sort of this like dry economics sounding thing, right?
Yeah, there was, I forget whose criticism I was coming across of that new Abundance magazine, the new liberal magazine, where their website at first was like a highlighter yellowish green color, and they received some, sorry, did I call it the wrong thing? They received some criticism of that, and they turned it into a more boring beige. And I'm personally not very attracted to bright highlighter colors, but I appreciate that they're trying to be bold and trying to bring that enthusiasm to bear. And it's a bit of a shame that they backtracked. If you're backtracking over the color of your website right out the gate, what else are you going to backtrack on? We need to be a bit more forceful, I think, to defend the American experiment here. And we're getting pretty close to 8 o'clock, so I know we need to wrap up. If anyone has anything burning they want to say, please do. And then I had one other question I wanted to make sure to ask, which is, I mentioned, I brought up originality a lot. And I talk to people sometimes who seem to feel like the well has dried up, that we're not going to really see people creating these new aesthetics anymore, that we can't, because it's kind of mind-boggling, you can't really imagine it until somebody invents it, because to imagine it would be to invent it. It's hard to picture definitionally. And you know, there's these concerns about cultural stagnation that aren't really new. They've been going back for decades. And I wonder, do you all feel like we're in a kind of stagnation? Do you feel like the well is dried up, or that there's still a lot of potential for inventing new aesthetics?
I want to answer this by asking a question, which is, I was born in 1980. I just turned 45, and I was graduating high school when Rage Against the Machine and Smashing Pumpkins and Tupac and Biggie and Garbage and Oasis and Blur were like, and Wu-Tang Clan was what we talked about. And it did feel like it was good, real music, and Nirvana and all that stuff. And Kurt Cobain killing himself was like a thing we all talked about at grade 11. But what I felt then, and I still feel today, which I'm surprised that I still feel today, the 90s and everything that came after the 90s do not feel as distinct as the 80s, 70s, 60s, and 50s felt. Each of those decades, aesthetically and vibes-wise, now that we have this language, felt distinct in a way that the 90s and everything that came after continues to feel less and less distinct, and everything is merging. And so I'm kind of curious why I feel this way, and why most of you are probably not going to vehemently disagree with me.
Oh, I'm at least partially going to disagree with you. I think that probably don't. I'm going to disagree with you. I think.
Did you do that on purpose, or it was like an automatic thing?
That's original. That was not in the 90s. We didn't have that in the 90s. I mean, that's...
So, for one thing, I think this is a common thing for people. I'm 10 years older than you are, but basically kind of the same, you know, similar, grew up in a similar sort of cultural thing. I remember playing the Smashing Pumpkins song Starla for my roommate, and him saying like, oh, they're doing nothing that Jimi Hendrix didn't do. So like there's that sentiment. But I would say as you age, you lose the ability to discern what's new and what's original. And the only way to know whether there's new music now, whether there's original music now, is to ask a teenager or to ask a 20-year-old. And we don't, I feel like, like it's almost like you're asking someone to kind of you've got too much. It's like the old scientist problem, right? The idea that
But John, no one in the
science is
80s
one
thought the
funeral at a
80s were
time.
not different from the 70s.
What?
No one in the 80s thought the 80s were not different from the 70s.
I mean, part of it's is
Well,
because
I disagree. I just
president from the 80s who you know gets all his news like a boomer watching cable. You know, like the presidents really do set a vibe,
Yeah, I
right?
think it has a lot to do with institutions, like
Yeah.
like in the 60s, 70s, 80s, record labels were like the cigarette smoke filled rooms that that people had there were institutions like channeling like funneling and filtering what pop culture would be in the music world. And then there's the disintermediation of that like of you know, with the internet we have just like more everything fractures, and there's institutions fall apart, and there's no filters, and everything's just like hangs loose.
Yeah.
That's my intuition on it.
Like, what's music now? What is? It's not necessarily what is on the radio. It's not necessarily what's coming out of record companies, right? Catherine D argues against the idea that technology has stagnated, which is a very common Gen X or maybe older millennial point of view, that technology stopped in the 90s and has stagnated ever since, right? It's like, no, you're only paying attention to the forms of culture that existed in the 90s. And you're not paying attention to everything else. We've moved into the internet now, right? Like, you have to look at meme music, you have to look at video game music, you have to look at like
there's little subcultures,
like you know, you have to look at like the things that people use on TikTok to like back up their video clips, things like that.
Agreed. I just, there's like a million little bubbles, and in little, and they're small, and each one has its own distinct culture and aesthetic or whatever and progression through history. But there's not one like popular culture the way it in the same way. Like, you know, you have Taylor Swift or something, but compared to the 80s, like, or earlier when you just had like 3 news channels that everyone got their news from, institutions like that.
Yeah, if you've read Dune, the book series, there is a moment called the Great Scattering, which is when the god emperor dies and everything falls apart and there's no longer a shared narrative. And there's all these different things that are happening at different points that are no longer connected. And he held all the things like Loki in the MCU right now, if also you're into that. But there's something that feels, maybe this is the like the reconciliation of what I feel and what you see, John, which is that there was this shared thing that broke, and I am not able to see everything that broke away. And so I can't feel the new anymore.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think there's also there was something truly unique about the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, where 80s and 90s, where things were moving faster. There was way faster cultural progression.
Like, is this a Cold War thing? Like the fall of the Berlin Wall?
I don't know exactly, but there was just more happening, and that was a weird time. So if you came of age in that time, you think that's normal. It's not normal.
I want to say, maybe this is because none of you guys are Swifties. I'm not even a Swiftie. But you know, you're like, oh, everything's in, you know, these little...
Taylor, how old are you?
How old am I?
Yes.
I'm 30 years old.
30.
I am 30 years old.
Okay.
But you know, the Taylor Swift basically had like a worldwide tour selling out for like the most like crazy expensive concert tickets for like, I don't know how long the Eras tour was going, like 2 years, 3 years. Like just going around the world selling out stadiums in like every single country she visited, to say that like, oh, you know, our culture is split up into tiny little niche subcultures seems to me to kind of not necessarily reflect that side of things, where someone can be such a like a superstar on a global level in that way. I also, my thought when you mentioned about the decades, you know, the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, right? Like, there's a bit of a survivorship issue here as well, where from our perspective today, even from your perspective as a high schooler, like the things that characterize those decades are the things that kind of survived, and you know, we were able to kind of construct this coherent vision of what that was about. But at the time, it was probably a little bit more, you know, there was a little bit more other stuff going on that just like didn't make it to today. So that those are my two kind of comments.
I have a very low confidence theory about why I've said the things that I said, which is that the capitalist machine that funded the arts, specifically music, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s was very unified. And so there was like sort of a beauty pageant kind of choosing, like you're going to be the grunge band, you're going to, it wasn't just boy bands, it was everybody, right? Yeah. So like, what was the name of the guy who was behind Death Row Records? Suge, does anybody help me here? Suge what? Suge something.
Nightly, I want to say. Suge Knight?
Knight? Yeah.
Something, I
right?
don't know.
Like he anointed everybody and like he kind of ran that, and there was things like this. And I feel like maybe the reason why we feel like the scattering happened in the 90s is that there was just a lot more money and there was a lot more things and the lowering cost, and there's never been a better time to be an introvert. And suddenly you couldn't keep up with everything and you felt like you didn't know, and tastemakers didn't exist anymore, and sort of like the Roger Ebert, like 2 thumbs up thing was gone. And there was just like just too much content and you couldn't keep up. And this kind of goes full circle to the audience thing, is like, if you don't hear that the tree fell, did it actually fall? And if you don't witness the specific moment where something happens, where a very specific artist breaks his guitar on stage, did you really experience it? And did that happen? So I think there was just too much content from the 90s. And maybe not all of us saw everything at the same time in the same way. And so we no longer have a reference point.
But do you
so now it's just
there was a proliferation of, say, music or even clothing styles since then?
Sorry, can you say that again?
But do you think there's a proliferation, even at a lower prominence, of different music styles or even clothing?
Yeah, there's a movie that Jonah Hill made called Mid-90s, which I hard recommend to all of you. And it's such a good movie because it's all about a bunch of kids hanging out at a video rental store in the mid-90s. And like the thing that comes through in this movie is that there's so much idle time where they're just doing nothing and they're just talking to each other. And they're kind of hoping someone interesting walks into the video store and talks to them, and they're just skater kids. But they're mostly bored. And I think the elimination of boredom, I don't know what Clerks is. Is that like 10 years too old for me?
No, it's from the 90s too, but it's a different.
Yeah, 90s.
Like mid-90s was made more recently. And so it's like kind of odd. I think it was made like 5 years ago. And it was so weird because I'm like, oh, I know these guys. I know this culture.
There was definitely a lot of hanging around parking lots or anywhere you could. My sense, although to John's point, I don't know that I can discern it well enough, is that music, the very distinct styles that we associate with previous decades didn't keep happening after 2000 or some year like that. I don't know why. Catherine D, who I know, has said, look, if you take a picture from 2003, you can tell it's a different decade. I also remember her saying, a culture that's not changing drastically every 10 years in its aesthetic is a sign of a stable culture, which really struck me. I don't think we're politically stable, but aesthetically, maybe we are. maybe in some sense it's a good thing, even though it sounds stagnant. But you know, for popular music or jazz to be the music in the 40s into the 50s and then suddenly be replaced by rock and roll, maybe that's a sign of a fracturing, unstable culture.
If only we could get Fukuyama to join this group chat right now and be like, dude, what happened in 1990 and what do you think it did to music?
I'll try to deliver for the next salon. Get Fukuyama here. It's a little after 8, so we have to wrap up. Thank you all so much, and I hope that those of you I don't already know well will keep in touch. And this is a topic that I want to write about more. I want to be invested in for a long time, and would love to hear your thoughts beyond our 2 hours tonight. So thank you so much. And if anyone's in New York, we're about to head over to the Campbell Bar in Midtown at Grand Central for a drink, and you're welcome to join us. It's a little last minute after party.
Good.
All right, so everybody,
Good.
have a good night.
Delightful.